So, very welcome, Kate, to Sweden. I almost could say, but we are very happy to have you here for this book talk today. We were supposed to have one more participant in the panel, Malin Widehammar, but she got how you say, Svante, help me with my English. she had something that prevented her from coming.
Yeah.
So we are the panel, and Svante, you are also very welcome, of course.
Thank you. Also welcome to Sweden. I'm sitting in Finland, so
yes,
that's
true. Yeah. So we have a panel with Barcelona and Oulu represented in northern Finland, and I sit in Färnebo, a small town in Sandviken municipality, Sweden, at Färnebo folkhögskola, which is the organizer of this event, together with Demokratisk omställning, which is a group working on, with municipalism in Sweden. So, Kate, I will shift to Swedish for a short while, and then I will sum it up. I will have a small chat with Svante first. And so I will wrap it up for you in just when we talk a little bit later. Svante, du får svara på lite fler frågor än jag hade tänkt, eftersom Malin fick för in det här. Jag tänkte första frågan. Du har jobbat med att översätta den här boken Orädda Städer till svenska. Kan du berätta lite om bakgrunden till det? Varför ges den här boken ut på svenska nu 2021?
Ja, det finns väl flera olika spår där, eller bakgrunder man kan säga, men kanske mest konkret var det i den här organisationen Demokratisk omställning då, som vi arrangerade 2016-2017 olika konferenser i Göteborg som vi kan väl säga att vi hade intresserat oss för den municipalistiska rörelsen, för de här rörelserna, Orädda Städer-rörelserna, som vuxit fram sedan 2015 kan man väl säga, i Europa och runt om i världen. Alltså lokala medborgarrörelser som har ett fokus kommunalt eller lokalt på staden och demokratisera staden och skapa en deltagande politik. Så att vi hade liksom gäster från Barcelona, en kommun till exempel, då på en av de här konferenserna, och hade diskussioner med många människor i ett bredare nätverk om att liksom sprida vidare de här idéerna och berätta om den här rörelsen mer. Så sen när vi hörde talas om den här boken så kände vi att det var ett bra sätt att gå vidare på. Sen har det varit en lång process att komma till en färdig bok. Men
nu är ni snart där. Nu är ni snart där. Ja. Du kan kanske säga lite om boken också. Vad är det för en bok? Vad innehåller den?
Ja, det är ju Orädda städer, en guide till den globala municipalistiska rörelsen, säger vi då. Så det är en handbok på många sätt, kan man säga. Den berättar om den här rörelsen av orädda städer som har liksom dykt upp på flera håll runt om i världen, och har liksom man har hittat en gemensamma drag som gör att man kallar det för har en gemensam beteckning på det, och har börjat liksom definiera sig som en egen tendens, så att säga. Och municipalist kommer ju då från municipal eller municipal, alltså kommunen. Och det lokala fokus då, att man fokuserar på kommunal omställning. Så. Men boken är upplagd med, det börjar med en del, jag vet inte om ni ser den, men här är den engelska upplagan då. Den är väl på drygt 200 sidor. Den svenska upplagan kommer att bli närmare 300 tror jag, för vi kommer ha ett svenskt förord med också och ett efterord som Kate har skrivit som berättar om de senaste årens utveckling. Och ja, så det kommer att bli lite tjockare. Men det börjar med en del som berättar om det här, om vad är municipalism? Vad som definierar den tendensen, den rörelsen med Orädda Städer. Och sen så är det en del som handlar om verktyg för organisering, 9 kapitel som pratar om hur man kan organisera sig lokalt och få med sig människor från olika grupper och få med sig liksom olika aktörer i lokalsamhället och bygga en ny politik. Och sen en tredje del som handlar mer om politiska program, mer sakpolitiskt om bostadsfrågor eller trafikfrågor, en ny ekonomi och så. Olika. Det är väldigt många personer som är med och skriver här. Det är 140 personer totalt som bidragit, så att det är liksom olika inlägg i en pågående diskussion kan man säga från den här rörelsen. Alla är liksom involverade på ett eller annat sätt i lokala kamper och lokala medborgarplattformar som man pratar om då. Alltså att man går samman medborgare i sin stad, lokalsamhälle och tar sig an den kommunala politiken, antingen genom att ställa upp i kommunvalet eller att på andra sätt skapa liksom forum för medborgare att vara med och bestämma saker.
Just det. Ja, det är imponerande. Det är ju en anledning, kanske ett skäl nog att köpa boken med 140 bidragsgivare till en bok. Det är inte så vanligt med så många som bidrar till en och samma bok. Jag tänkte en sista fråga till dig innan vi börjar prata med Kate. Varför tänker du själv, nu tänkte jag fråga om Sverige, men det är ju en bok på svenska. Det är en bok som vänder sig till folk som kan läsa svenska både i Finland och i Sverige och i andra nordiska länder där man tycker sig kunna läsa, eller där man kan läsa svenska. Men varför tycker du det här är en viktig bok ändå i 2021 i Sverige och i Norden, kan jag ju säga då?
Ja, jo, men det är ju en pågående rörelse alltså, som växer och sprider sig, framförallt bland annat i Frankrike har det vuxit senaste åren nu. Så att och jag tycker att den diskussionen behöver liksom komma in i Sverige mer också och i andra nordiska länder då. Den har inte varit så synlig där liksom. Och att jag tycker det är en väldigt spännande bok just genom dess upplägg, så att den kan tala till väldigt många olika, tror jag, både liksom sådana som är aktiva i små partier eller sådana som jobbar mer utanför partier med lokala frågor eller med genom olika fält. Den talar både till liksom antirasistisk rörelse och till en feministisk rörelse och till liksom rätten till staden, rörelser eller vad man ska kalla urbana rörelser, och även liksom landsortsrörelser eller vad man ska kalla det för. Så att jag tror att den kan tala till väldigt många och har ett liksom nytt och fräscht angreppssätt på frågor som är väldigt spännande. Just
det. Tack så mycket, Svante. Vi kommer tillbaks till det här, varför det här är en intressant bok 2021. Men det var ju några goda skäl att titta på den här. Okej, jag kommer byta språk nu till engelska. Kate, now we have had our small introduction in Swedish. And we have just, we talked a little bit about this book. that you also have been working with. And Svante explained a little bit about what the book contains, what it's dealing with, and a little bit about the background that we now are publishing it in Swedish. But now I will turn to you with a few questions. And you, just to start, you have written a new, now my English is too bad, a new prologue. Thank you for the book. And you also written other things in the book too. So, but before we talk about the book, because you live in Barcelona and you work politically in Barcelona, tell us a little bit about yourself. You are from the UK, but you live in Barcelona and you are working with Barcelona en Comú. How did you end up there?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I think over the last year, we've missed a lot of things, personally and politically, especially coming together with our comrades and neighbors, both in Barcelona, but also these kind of debates and presentations and talks that we've been doing all over the world for the past few years to try and explain the Barcelona experience and also learn from other similar experiences. And obviously over the last year, we haven't done much of that. So it's really nice to be able to do that, even if it is online. So thank you very much. I guess, I mean, I suppose the thing that grabs your attention about me being from the UK and working in Barcelona politics is, I guess it is a bit strange, but for me, actually the stranger thing is, why am I involved in Barcelona politics when I had become completely politically disengaged, which is part of the reason I moved to Barcelona, because when I was a teenager at university, I was very, very politically engaged and involved in a lot of activism. And then I kind of lost hope. And I think, like a lot of people from my generation, the Iraq War was a big reason why. And so I was one of the many people who, okay, maybe I would vote in an election, but I had never wanted to participate in any kind of political party, and professional politics to me seemed like something that was not just a waste of time, but also quite a corrupt system. And to me, it's strange, not because I'm doing it in Barcelona, but because I'm doing it at all. And I think that's actually part of the power of this project and similar ones, is the ability to mobilize and get people involved who had either never or had given up on electoral politics. So in my case, I was here working and living, and I by chance saw a sign saying "Let's win Barcelona," and I didn't really know what it was, and I went along to this initial presentation, where this was back in 2014, where I saw Ada Colau, who at that time was a housing activist who had been taking direct action to stop evictions in the city, and other activists who had been involved in the Indignados or campaigns against austerity. There was a whole mix of different people there, and they were all saying the same thing, which is, you know, we've got to take back our city, and, you know, we've got to not just put forward a progressive manifesto or political platform, but we've also actually just got to change the way politics is done. It's not just about the policies, it's about how we do it. We need to be more democratic, more transparent, more inclusive. And I just thought this is it. If there's any time that I'm gonna, and also we've got to win, which is another thing, because there's, you know, there's a lot of left projects which, you know, I have sympathized with, and I thought I completely agree with you, but I could tell that they were not only not going to win, but perhaps didn't even have any ambition to win, because actually often it's a lot more comfortable to criticize from the sidelines. And this was a project, this was obviously a project that really actually seriously wanted to win, and I thought, this is it. So that's how I became involved, and a lot of other people too.
Perhaps I could ask you to explain a little bit about Barcelona en Comú, because some of us in listening to you now, we have heard about Barcelona en Comú and your experience and this project, but others haven't heard about it at all. It's not like media is telling the story every day. So please tell us a little bit, what is your experience, and what is the project of Barcelona en Comú?
Sure, I'm not offended if anyone hasn't heard of us at all. In fact, it's in nobody's interest. Well, it's not in the powers that be's interest that people know that this kind of thing is possible, because then other people might try and do it too, right? So Barcelona en Comú actually was part of a network across Spain of activists and of citizens who, after the crisis of 2008, and then the Indignados movement of 2011, were thinking about, you know, next steps, and about how to take all of this energy and both critical and proposals that were on the streets into institutional politics, and how to make that leap from the street to the institution, because people ask me a lot about the limits of institutional politics, but social movement politics also has a lot of limits too, right? So at that time in 2011 to 2014, there was a debate about how to do that and where to do that, and the conclusion was that the best place to start doing it would be in the local elections of 2015, precisely because of what I was talking about before, which is this is about winning, and this is about changing the way politics is done. And actually, if we want to do those two things, the place where we have the best chance both to organize and win is in the local elections. And if we want to start doing politics in a more democratic, participatory way, that's kind of, you know, if we can't do it at local level, then we can't do it at any level. We've got to start small, and build up. And one of the key ideas also was this idea of confluence, which is what we call the idea of bringing everyone in. So it wasn't just activists, it was also members of Podemos, which is a new party at the time, on the left, more old traditional left parties that were very small, and the idea of kind of generosity of all of these different kind of people, and the idea that together we're stronger, right? And coming together to build something new. And that was also a really important idea. And Ada Colau, the housing activist that I mentioned before, was our mayoral candidate. And we won the elections in Barcelona. We were the most voted for party, and similar platforms won in Madrid and also in a lot of other Spanish cities. And we also have continued it for a second term now since 2019, the last elections. And since then, basically, we are trying to put into practice what I said before, which is progressive, environmental, feminist, and social justice kind of policies, but also a new way of doing politics. So, and that also, an important element there is our code of ethics, which we have, which is a system that is designed to stop us falling into the bad practices of traditional political parties. So, for example, our mayor and our councillors have a salary limit to keep their salary around average level salaries, because in Spain, actually, politicians get paid huge salaries and expenses, and we don't take the expenses, for example. Or term limits, so we have maximum of 2 terms that could be extendable to 3 maximum, but we don't want people to be in power for decades and decades, and other kind of ethical rules about transparency and that kind of thing. And so in the last 6 years, we have stopped over 10,000 evictions in Barcelona with our an anti-eviction unit that we've set up. We've created a municipal energy company, and we've done a lot of work kind of standing up to big international lobbies like Airbnb, Amazon, Agbar, which is the private water company, which we've tried to remunicipalize the water here, but unfortunately they beat us in the courts. So yeah, I'll maybe leave it there because there's so much to explain, and I probably have more opportunity later.
I could ask you one thing, because as I have understood this thing with participation, citizen participation and participatory democracy, I have understood is a very central part of how you have been working within Barcelona and Comú, but also together with the city. Could you just mention how that have played out? How has this looked like in practice?
Yeah, so like you say, there's kind of 2 levels. One is in the party, though we don't like to call it a party really, but we have over 1,500 activists who are in our neighborhood assemblies and, well, different parts of the organization. We have a choir, we have a group that does street activism. We have all of these different ways of participating in Barcelona en Común, and we try to have we try to work in a way that isn't that, you know, the party does the program and the list for the election, and then we wait until the next elections, until, you know, then our mayor and our councillors go and do what they want to do, and we'll see you in 4 years, and the party is, you know, inactive. What we try to do is have a very continuous and fluid relationship between our elected representatives and our neighborhood activists, and try and have it's difficult, but to try and big decisions, take them in our assemblies or on an online vote, and have a kind of continuous accountability and also feedback from the organization to the government. So that's one side. And the other is, as you say, the institutional participation that we're doing with kind of all residents in Barcelona. And here, I mean, in some ways, it's a very, what's the word? Transversal? I'm not sure if that's a real word. Approach, in that, let's say that I think a lot of it has to do with recognizing as political actors and subjects different people and groups in the city. So I remember back in 2015, Ada Colau saying, you know, we got to City Hall and the people and the companies and the kind of rich and powerful people in Barcelona who didn't have our phone numbers, you know, the people who would usually call up the mayor or call up the councillor to say, hey, help me out with this. They didn't know who we are, and they didn't have the ways of influence that they used to have with the classic parties. And they still don't, because what we do is we say, oh yes, you know, the rich and the powerful have to participate also in in city politics, but they have to do it on the same terms as everyone else, right? They have to go through the same systems of, you know, putting forward their proposals and complaints as other groups. And we're also going to recognize, you know, informal, local, organized groups of neighbors, you know, even if they're not an official organization legally, or I don't know, sex workers or undocumented immigrants. There's a whole set of different types of people in the city who now are recognized and included in political decision making. And then there's some more formal tools like Decidim, which is our online open source participation platform, which has been used now in many cities and governments around the world, which is a way of having online participation. But usually when we do a participation process on Decidim, we also have a parallel in-person process. So it's not just a case of doing online participation as a thing on its own, but it's combining it with the in-person meetings and making sure that all of the inputs and feedbacks and debates of the in-person meetings are uploaded onto Decidim, and I think this is very important, the idea of participation process being traceable, because our city hall, like many city halls, has always said that it's in favor of participation. I mean, nobody says that they're against participation, right? But what would happen before is that there would be some sort of, you know, meeting or session or debate, and the councillors would come and listen, and then you'd never know what would become of it or why. And that's the idea, is that one, that these things are traceable, and so you can see, okay, this idea that I said in that meeting, you know, went through this process, and if it was rejected, why was it rejected, and be able to actually see that you've been taken seriously. And the other element is that having some processes that are consultative, but also some processes that are binding, so that it's just, you know, we're going to do this process, and the city hall is not going to be able to go back on what's been decided. So we've introduced a whole new kind of participation law, which has various elements. One is the ability for citizens to put forward a proposal of a law to the city council floor. The other is local referendums on different questions, which can be either at the proposal of the government or of citizens. And I think there are some more that I can't remember right now. But having these mechanisms that allow the decisions to be binding. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I believe, I mean, that sounds very good. I know a little bit about participatory democracy and how it has been tried out in Swedish municipalities. Our group, Demokratisk Omställning, has been around for a few years. And if you look the last like 20, 30 years, I think it's fair to say that, well, there has been a few attempts at more participatory practices in municipalities, but often the thing is that the elected politicians never let the citizens take any decisions or vote on anything that is binding. So it's always consultative, and sad to say, in Swedish experience, it's mostly not listened to. So even if they have had a referendum on a topic, this is a very typical situation in a Swedish municipality. If they have had, it's not too many referendums, but there are a few municipal referendums that have been taking place, and many times it's being ignored, or the politicians do the other way around, even there was a referendum. So yes, I think it's more about this practical side of things in the book. So we could go a little further and just hint for those who haven't seen the book and haven't read it. So there is more about this very interesting topic about how to organize citizen participation in the book. And but we are still in this pandemic, and I would like to. I know you have written about it, and you have had a very bad situation also in Barcelona and in Spain. So could you just tell us, how do you think it has affected you in Barcelona, but also why this movement for fearless cities, or this municipalist movement overall? What is your understanding there?
Well, I'm sure that we won't know how it's affected us probably for some time, really, but our first kind of impressions are, well, firstly, it's another crisis, right? And we've kind of jumped from, we came to office in a crisis, in a social crisis, then we had a national crisis in Catalonia, and it's another crisis that has obviously worsened inequalities in our city, both on a health level. The impact of COVID was very unequal between the poor and the rich neighborhoods, but also the economic impact is also being very unequal. So in that sense, it makes everything more difficult. It's also made participation more difficult, as we were talking about, right? So this year last year we wanted to start our first citywide participatory budgeting process, and that had to be delayed. And also a lot of the things that we'd started in the first term, like we have these meetings with the mayor where Ada Colau will go to a different neighborhood and just kind of have a citizen assembly there where she'll listen and answer questions and respond to people. And we had to stop that. And we also had to stop the new initiative that we had, which was inspired by New York, which is moving the mayor's office to a different district every month as a way of kind of decentralizing the city hall in a way. And, you know, a lot of participatory, well, just almost everything ground to a halt in that sense. So that was difficult, but it's also changed the landscape of the city in a lot of ways. I mean, one of the big political issues here was tourism and the kind of mass tourism and the excessive kind of pressure of tourism on the city and especially on housing, with the whole Airbnb thing that I was talking about before. And obviously, in a way, we've been proved right in that the collapse of tourism has caused, you know, we did have an excessive dependence on tourism. But obviously now the debate isn't about, you know, how can, you know, there are too many tourists, because there aren't any at all, really. And economically, that's a disaster. And I think it also really highlighted both the deficiencies in the housing stock, because housing has been a big issue for us, particularly the need for rent control and also, well, the cost of rent at least, and evictions. But one thing that we hadn't really talked about much was the quality of housing, because actually in Barcelona, the weather's nice and people, you know, spend a lot of time. You can have kind of a dark, kind of small housing, but you can go out into the street. And I think, I mean, here during the first part of COVID, we weren't even allowed out for a walk in Barcelona during a couple of months. And obviously there were severe issues of overcrowding in some cases, and that really showed that. And it also showed the necessity for better public spaces, so that, you know, if your private space is inadequate, then you at least need public spaces that are pedestrianized, car-free, well, you can, if you can't socialize in closed spaces, allow socialization in open spaces. Well, it changed a bit of, you know, the kind of topography of the city. And then finally, and I don't want to say this, I don't want this to be badly interpreted, because obviously this has been a huge crisis that no one would have wanted, but it has changed the political agenda from the issue of Catalan independence that was dominating politics at every level in Spain, not just in Catalonia, but across Spain and also at city level. And that issue is still very much there, but issues about health and social policy and the economy at least are being talked about now. And for us, that's not a bad thing, because, you know, these are the things that we've been wanting to talk about for the last few years, and it's been very difficult to do that. So yeah, it is true that I think that in terms of the movement, the inability to get together is a huge difficulty for us, because our whole strength is based on participation, as I said before, but also this idea of coming together to debate, to decide together, to put together our common problems, to organize, to talk to our neighbors, and that's the way also we communicate, because we don't have mass media on our side, we don't have money, and so the way that we communicate is talking to people directly, and that's something we can't do. So that's you know, we're really noticing that the impact of that.
You have also you have written about that the pandemic has put a larger focus on the politics of everyday life, and that is something positive that perhaps the movement can build on. And can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, one of the things we talk about when we talk about municipalism is its link with feminism, and the idea that the personal is political, which is something that the feminist movement has taught us. Know that your body, your identity, the things that happen in your life, not necessarily in the public sphere, but in the private sphere, in your home life, your family life, are not, you know, just, they haven't fallen from the sky, but they're the result of political decisions. And municipalism kind of builds on that, and it says, well, the personal is political, and we want people to have power, or be empowered over their own lives. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with what's close to us, and the things that are very tangible and very real in our daily lives, even if they seem very small. So yeah, the public space in front of your apartment, is it a park, is it a car park, your bus route, your bus services, your waste collection, all of these kind of things about the streets and neighborhood around you, and start to have people build on their expertise and their knowledge about the world around them in order to take decisions about the things that affect them. And the pandemic has very much you know, shown that things to do with whether we come together, whether how we interact with one another can have life or death consequences. So, and also it's put the idea of, or the issue of care and of health and of interdependence on the table, as things that have to be taken very seriously. So yeah, I think that the change of the agenda, or the change of not just the agenda, but also the values. I saw some a survey in Spain that said that something like 70% of people had changed their values since COVID. And I think people are looking at their lives and what they value in a different way due to COVID. So yeah, I think that would probably be in a municipalist direction.
Yes, yes. Maybe I could jump a little bit, but because we have also heard those news that the municipalist movement have moved forward in France a lot in last year's elections. Do you see a connection here between the pandemic and what has happened in France with those municipal, should we say municipal victories or municipalist victories that has been taking place in France?
I have to say that France is not my expertise because I don't speak French. So that makes it very difficult. Yeah. But no, I wouldn't say they're related. In fact, I would say that if anything, COVID probably weakened the municipalist candidacies in France for the reasons I was saying before, because actually they have their origins a few years before. Back in, I think it was 2016, the Nuit debout movement, which was like the French Indignados, where they occupied squares, like had happened in Spain. And there had been for quite a few years a build-up of social movement activism in French cities, particularly because of the blockage or paralysis at national level. There were a few rounds of French elections where, you know, it was like the far right or the candidate who's not the far right. And that was, you know, not the most inspiring prospect. So I think because of what was happening at national level and also because of what had happened in Spain, a lot of French activists started to think, maybe we can do what had happened in Spain. And in fact, we from Barcelona and other parts in Spain had quite a few visits to different French cities, and we've had a back and forth for quite a few years, and we were very excited about what could happen in the French municipal elections last year, because we knew that they had been working on candidacies, but the second round of the elections were delayed due to COVID. And then, but there were quite good results. I mean, I think there were over 400 municipalist candidacies, 66 won seats, and they won mayoralties in Grenoble, Ceilán, Marseille, Lyon, Nantes, quite a few cities. So yeah, but I think it was more despite COVID than because of it.
That's good to know. So you don't get too hopeful about the situation. Anyway, what the news that reaches us from about France is not so much about the municipalist platforms and how they are working with participation or how their movements are structured, but we have read in the news about like the efforts of Paris to green the city, and especially green the transport sector, but also this concept of the 15-minute city. It has got some coverage in Sweden. What is this? This green theme of municipalism, how does it play out if you look around outside Paris? How have you been working in Barcelona with like greening the city?
Yeah, it's a big project for us. Barcelona is a very densely populated city, and it's also got a lot of traffic on the streets. Most of it comes from outside the city. People in Barcelona don't tend to drive, but people do drive into Barcelona. And we started in our first term with this idea of super blocks. And what a super block is, a lot of streets in Barcelona are on a grid system. And so if you, at the cross of the grid, pedestrianize those streets, what you get in the middle is like a square, like what would be the crossroads becomes like a public square. And so we've developed a network of these super blocks where we either cut off or very much limit the traffic on those streets, and then turn those crosses into squares where we put trees, benches, playgrounds. And the idea is now we're moving towards what we call super block Barcelona, where the ultimate vision is for that network to, you know, connect up and to extend over the whole city. Exaggerating a bit, but that it shouldn't just be, you know, one super block here and one here, but it should be a whole network, so that you should be able to, for example, walk from one point of the city right across to the other, all through pedestrian and green spaces. So that's a kind of flagship policy for us, and obviously it meets with a lot of resistance from the car kind of lobby, but it's a policy that has a positive health impact, obviously. And like I was saying before, it's the public space in a context where housing is pretty limited and precarious is really important.
Can I thank you. In Sweden, one of the, I think, the most pressing social ills, our society has become more unequal economically and socially since the 80s. Before the 80s, we had a positive trend with social democracy, but now it's becoming worse and worse all of the time. And one way it plays out is that our cities are very segregated, yeah, of course, class divides, class oppression, and racism is a very big issue now in Sweden. How does this look in Barcelona, and how have you been working with it from a municipalist point of view?
Well, we have a similar issue. We have inequality between different neighborhoods, and in Barcelona it tends to be on the, well, I think like in a lot of cities, it's the neighborhoods on the periphery that tend to be more deprived. And I think almost on every indicator, even life expectancy, there's, you know, 7 years difference, I think, between the richest and the poorest neighborhood. Our main policy is what we call the neighborhood plan. It's not a very exciting name, but it's basically a huge investment program. I'm trying to find the number now, because I know it's a huge number and I would like to be able to say it, but I can't find the actual number of euros that it is. But it's a huge investment plan in the most deprived neighborhoods, and it's again investments that are made in a participatory way. So the projects are everything from educational and social and cultural projects to physical, buildings of facilities. But the plan or the investment of the money or employment programs, but each neighborhood defines its own plan with the city. So that's our kind of major policy, and it's a real kind of central plank of our platform. And it's kind of also worth contrasting it to previous governments, which had very much focused on beautifying the center of the city, thinking about tourists particularly and the tourist economy. So the idea is to kind of de-invest in the center and invest in the neighborhoods on the outskirts. So that's kind of the main approach.
Yes. Maybe we should look. I know you're from Barcelona, so your expertise is what are you doing in Barcelona, but you have an international overview, more than me anyway, more than most of us. So how and the book, the Fearless Cities book, it tried to document how those municipalist platforms are working in a very broad range of cities all over the world. If we talk about this with the class division of our cities and the segregation, is this a topic, something that the municipalist movement is working with everywhere?
I think that the tendency that you described of growing inequality since the 1980s is very much a global phenomenon, and also the phenomenon of segregation as well. So yes, definitely it's something that all municipalists are tackling in different ways. Some from inside the institution, some from outside. And in fact, in terms of the racial dimension, I think Brazil is a really interesting place to look at, because in the last municipal elections, they had a record number of women and non-white candidates standing in the municipal elections, and they're really kind of at the forefront of this kind of change in representation at local level.
Yes. In the book there are 50 platforms documented, those municipalist platforms. How many municipalist platforms are there in the world? Do you have a clue?
Well, I can tell you that the 50 in the book, there's probably, well, in fact, I know there's at least some of them that don't exist anymore, but I also know that they're being created all the time, and it's very hard to keep up with the evolving map of municipalist organizations. On the Fearless Cities website, because we knew this, obviously, when we wrote the book, and so what we did was we put an interactive map on the website, and the idea is that people can submit organizations. And so our idea was, or is still, that when a new municipalist organization is created, that either somebody from that organization or somebody who knows about it fills in the form on the website, and then we can kind of, if not have a completely up-to-date picture, at least try to reflect a bit the evolution. But there are 50 in the book, but at the Fearless Cities event in 2017, we had representatives from over 100. So that 50 was already a selection. And if there were 100 in 2017 who came physically to Barcelona, I couldn't possibly tell you how many there were or are, but also it depends how you we use quite a broad definition, to be fair, but it's certainly, the sense is that the movement is growing.
Yes, I think I just saw a question from the chat here, and we are soon going to look even more in the chat, but there was I think a question about these, let's see, the neighborhood plan that you talked about, and I think it was about if you could clarify how those investments are made, and how the citizens in those areas are participating in making the priorities for this investment plan. It's also specifically, how are you working with these citizen assemblies in these areas, and who is getting employed to put those investments into practice? That's very, I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit on this. Your mic is off.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I can give it a go, but I must confess that I'm not directly working on this. So it's possibly something I could send you information in writing on after the event. But as far as I understand it, there are they set up a specific new commission in each neighborhood, and that commission, first of all, before deciding about what's going to be done and where the money's going to go, the first process is about deciding the goals, because I think that's very important, is before getting to the detail, because people might think, oh, I want to do, want to fix that building, or I want there to be a local theatre group. It's like, no. What is the situation in this neighborhood? What are our goals for here into 4-10 years time? And the first debate and participation is about that. And then once that's been identified, the debate passes to what things could we do to get there? And then a lot of the actual projects that are done are then also participatory, whether they be about historical memory or education or whatever the topic may be. So as well as investing in the specific project, the projects themselves become tools of community cohesion and community building. But I can't give much more detail because I don't know it off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
No, but that was a good answer. So I think we have another question which is somewhat related to this. It's about how you're working on creating a new economy. And you mentioned remunicipalizing the water company, which you didn't manage to do. But you started an energy company in Barcelona. And what other ways are you working on this new economy? Are you working to promote cooperatives, for example?
Yes, we're lucky in Barcelona because there already was a relatively strong cooperative movement, and that really helps because if there is a base and a strong cooperative movement, then from City Hall you can try and, for example, adapt your procurement processes in order to include those kind of organizations, or you can try and help them grow. And I have spoken to people in other countries that don't have that, and obviously they say we can put a cooperative, a commitment to cooperatives in our program, but if we get into City Hall, there are no cooperatives out there. It's not that easy to start from zero. So yes, so we have been doing that. But I think the reflection we've been making as well is we can't be stuck in that with just that, because although there is a strong cooperative movement, it's less than 10% of the economy in the city. And as much as we might want to overthrow capitalism, we're not going to do that from one city hall. And we have to deal with the actual reality of the economy in the city. And for us, I think there's a big issue is, or a big goal, is trying to get international corporations to play by the rules of the game, to respect local democracy. And that's the battle we've been having with Airbnb, which is, if Barcelona says that unlicensed tourist accommodation is illegal, then we are going to follow, we're going to come down on Airbnb with the full force of the law. We're going to do inspections, we're going to take them to court, we're going to fine them. And similarly with other companies that are exploiting people in our city. And the other side of that is trying to promote not necessarily cooperatives, but small local businesses, that aren't the devil because they want to profit, like a small shop or a bar, we prefer that to an international chain shop, right? There's different types of capitalism and different types of business, and the issue of working conditions as well is really important. One of the things that we've put in our city procurement policy is, if you apply for a contract with the city hall, we're going to take into account as part of your score what your working conditions are, what salaries you pay, what gender equality plans you have, and try and incentivize in that way good practice. And there was something else I wanted to say that and of course the issue of speculation, which is related to housing, and trying to increase the level of public housing and municipal owned land, in order, and also to again make sure that people who are trying to speculate with housing in our city are acting at least within the law. So yeah, it is difficult to govern the economy, which at the moment the economy is global in scale. From a city, I think it's even difficult for a national government, but the national government does have many more tools than we do. But there's no doubt that we're doing everything that we can to try and at least limit the damage.
We have a few more questions relating to those participatory processes. We should get back to them, but I want to give you another question about the economic issue, or the economical transformation that you are working for, and that the municipalist initiatives are working for, maybe more broadly. Because one question I had to you was that there are lots of municipalist platforms, and they obviously have some similarities, and I think we have been talking a little bit about them. But what differences do you see if you look around? What in like emphasis, ways of working, and kind of thinking and practice?
Okay, this is a good question, actually. I'm more used to talking about the similarities, so it's interesting to think about the differences. No, I think a few things come to mind. The first is whether they work inside or outside institutions. For me, you don't have to stand for election in City Hall in order to be a municipalist platform. There are many, for example, in Jackson, Mississippi, there's an organization called Cooperation Jackson, which is doing amazing work, which doesn't stand for election. In Italy, in Naples as well, there's what are they called? Massa Critica, another assembly-based group that and both of these organizations and others like them, they are working on municipal politics, and they're often in very close dialogue with the mayor or the city hall. But for whatever reason in that context, they've decided that they're going to get more done from the outside, putting pressure from the outside than from the inside. And I think that's totally legitimate. And I think that context is important, and things like, you know, local election systems, because it's in some countries it's very easy to set up a local political party and stand for elections. In others it's very different, depends on the voting system. So that's one thing. Another difference is their attitude to supra-municipal politics, by which I mean regional, national, state politics. Some municipalist platforms have decided to stay exclusively at the municipal level, while others have decided to support other parties at other levels, or even participate in politics at other levels. And that's a kind of another strategic debate, which I think also depends on context. And what else? I mean, for me, the thing that really unites what I feel is the municipalist identity is, if there is one thing apart from the local scale, it's the idea of actually making tangible changes at city level, the idea of getting stuff done. And I think that's something that that unites all of us. And I couldn't think of any municipalist organization where they say, well, what we do is we kind of sit around and we debate how the world should be, and then we go home. I think it tends to be a very pragmatic movement, a movement that, you know, prefers to see one tiny change than no change at all, and also a movement that is willing to, let's say, to take difficult decisions or to get its hands dirty in order to make things happen. It's not a kind of a movement that wants purity of pure ideology, let's say. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that helps. I think maybe we can return to some of these, because I now have my eyes on the chat, and Svante, I ask you for help in reading the chat. But I find there were several questions about how you work with like promoting citizen participation in defining policy, and the different difficulties involved with this, or perhaps the dangers also within the context of our a zeitgeist which is turning to the right or something like that. I don't know exactly the Spanish situation, but in many countries we see this, the rising xenophobia, the racism. So one question is here: do you see this that this is a danger, that those arenas or this approach to citizen participation is being used by those forces? I think this was one question.
Okay, I have to say, as a side note, I have the feeling that I'm in a room full of people who know far more about participation than I do. So I just, which is fine, but I just, I don't know if I should be the one answering the questions, because I feel you all probably have thought a lot more about this than I have. On this question, I think two things. One, Barcelona is a kind of left-wing radical utopia. I mean, I'm exaggerating, obviously. You know, the mayor before us was a right-wing mayor, but historically, culturally, it's a left-wing city, and although there is a right, there's both a kind of conservative, liberal right, and there's also a very small kind of far right. This isn't kind of an issue that we have to or have had to directly wrestle with, or at least, I mean, it probably has happened in specific occasions, but it's not kind of the biggest problem for us, probably. But I do think that as a reflection, it's worth making, because I think it's, like I was saying before, it's very easy to say, oh, I'm so in favor of participation and blah, blah, blah. But you can't just, it's not really, it's a bit cynical to say that if at the first sign that somebody disagrees with you, you're going to say, actually, this is better that I take this decision. And I think there's a real question about that we kind of have to ask ourselves before we say, no, I'm in favor of participation, is, do I really kind of have a basic, not even a faith in humanity, but do I think that people basically know what's best for them, at least, or people, even if I disagree with them, and even if they've been manipulated by kind of right-wing propaganda or whatever it is, whatever they're saying, there's some reason why they're saying it. Like, there's some reason maybe they've got to a conclusion that I don't agree with. But if they're doing a kind of racist, xenophobic discourse, there's probably something wrong. There's probably some real problem there, that they're blaming immigrants, but there's probably something there that actually has to be dealt with. So, and of course, the other big issue with participation is NIMBYism, which is maybe slightly different in that sense. But it is true that
Please explain, because we are not all fluent English. NIMBYism, what is that?
Yeah, this is not in my backyard. This is when people don't want something to happen, or a project that could be good for the community because, it's going to be built right, it's going to block their view from their front garden or whatever. But again, they're defending a legitimate interest and concern. It's not that they're necessarily bad people. So yeah, I do think the challenge is, like, we've got to be very aware of the risk of having a kind of incoherent, cynical, approach in terms of people. We've got to be willing to work with people we don't agree with. We've got to be willing to listen to them, and we've got to be able to find mechanisms that and I think here, both the mechanism of participation and also education are very important in terms of facilitating people listening to one another, and facilitating community values and not just individual values. And so, I think there's a cultural shift that has to, I have to say, Barcelona does already have a very participatory culture in general, but even here, I think it is dangerous to just say, I'm going to do participatory budgeting, I'm going to drop 100 million euros here, fight over them, see who comes out, winning. Because also, obviously, the power structures and the inequalities that are in our society can often be reproduced in participatory spaces. So it's definitely not easy to actually do in practice, but I think if we really do think that people have a sense of what their interests are and say things for a reason and want things for a reason, then we've got to be able to find a way to do it. And I think it's important because one of the major, it's vital that we do it, because one of the major issues that we face is the distribution of power in society. So if we don't do participatory politics, then what happens is the status quo, and the status quo, the power is not concentrated in the hands of a group of intellectual left-wing visionaries. Power in the world is concentrated in the hands of a very few corporations and parties that are usually dependent on those corporations. So for all the difficulties of participation, I think we also have to think about what the alternative is. The only way we can possibly have a counterpower to those corporate powers is by being many people and having a social majority. So I think I've rambled on a bit, sorry.
No problem. I think I'm jumping back to, I mean, we're talking a lot about participation, and it's good you tell us, maybe there are people listening here that know more about participation than you. I think participation is, it's difficult to become an expert in participation. I think anyone believing to be an expert should humble herself or himself a little bit, because everyone, I mean, especially if the goal is that everyone should participate, I think everyone is an expert about what the difficulties are and the possibilities. But we had one question about these efforts that you have undertaken in Barcelona, and to what extent you see that they have broken down the barriers for people from disadvantaged backgrounds to participate in the decision-making process. I think that's an important question. And perhaps you know, I mean, I asked you about the experience in Barcelona, but we could also talk about the experiences in other cities, fearless cities, or with municipalist platforms.
Okay, so here I'd like to give just one specific example, which is very recent or current, because I just found it really really illustrative of the power of participation. So at the moment we're doing the participatory budgeting for the first time after it was delayed last year, and we're doing the phase of voting on Decidim, the platform I mentioned before. There's a phase after the presentation of the different projects where there's a kind of citywide or district-wide vote where people can vote for their top projects. And in the district, well, I think it's the district of Sands, the top voted project is a group of young people of Pakistani origin who want to build a cricket field or cricket facilities. And they've organized to both put forward the proposal and get more votes than anyone else. And for me, it's just the perfect example of how this is a kind of group of people who you will never see in the corridors of power. You never see them even on the TV. They have no visibility in society. They're not the economic elite. They're not the political elite. They're not the cultural elite. They're asking for something that would probably never be done in, Barcelona is a city that, has a lot of sports that people play or are interested in. Cricket is not generally one of them. But for this group of young people, it's their biggest, dream to have a cricket facility in Barcelona. And that for me is an example of of a group of people who have been included and empowered by a specific participatory process.
Yes, thank you. I think we could also say there are a few examples of about this in the book. Yes. I would like to encourage everyone who have been listening now for a while, if you have any questions, I should, with the help of Svante, look in the chat, because there are a few questions we haven't picked up, but I want to encourage everyone to think about if there is anything you would like to ask Kate about municipalism in Barcelona, or in general in other places too. Feel free to ask. We have half an hour more to speak to Kate about this. So we had a very specific question early on that that popped up early on, that about solar energy in Barcelona. Is there a problem? Are people not allowed to build more solar energy facilities in Barcelona?
This may be connected to a Spanish law that was controversial, but it's not something I know much about, but it certainly wouldn't be a policy of ours. There was a Spanish law a few years back that kind of devastated the solar energy industry, but I'm not exactly sure what the state of that is at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, yes. Could you tell us a little bit about the experience with the municipal energy company that you started? How is that unfolding?
Well, it's a distributor. Again, energy is not my specialty, but it's a distributor, and it's also got a governance structure that is quite interesting, where it has a kind of a citizen assembly. You know, if you are a user of Barcelona, it's called Barcelona Energia. If you are a user of that distributor, then you can participate in the company decisions. And the other thing that's quite important is every January, I don't know how it works in Sweden, every January there's the main corporate energy companies raise their prices, and Barcelona Energia didn't this year, for example. So it's also helping to combat, is lowering prices and helping to combat energy poverty, and it also has a green sustainable sources of renewable energy. So there are some difficulties because of competition rules, and it's not that easy to set up municipal companies in Spain, or maybe in Europe in general, actually. But people are signing up to it. It's the company that also supplies. The way it started was when it was launched was that it supplies all of the city energy needs in terms of the city hall itself and all of the city owned buildings. And then it was opened up to, I don't know how many thousand, whether it was 20,000 or something, homes, individual homes could use it. And it's kind of being rolled out on a gradual basis. It wasn't open to the whole citizen straight away. But yeah, it's become quite a successful model.
Yes. Maybe we had a more broader question that is also very interesting, relating to what everything you have said about the Barcelona experience and Barcelona and Comú taking power in Barcelona in 2015, and then trying to govern the city in a participatory way. What are the big challenges and the big problems in taking a new way to make politics into the institutions. Yes.
Well, there's one example that I haven't mentioned so far that I think that I have to mention, which is we mentioned earlier the idea of remunicipalizing the water, and a few years before we came into office, there was a kind of dodgy contract where the metropolitan government of Barcelona privatized the water system, and they did it without the proper public tender that you should do. And the deal was really bad for the city, and it was really good for Agbar, Suez, this whatever it's called. Well, it's Agbar in Barcelona, and the company is Suez. I won't lose the opportunity to say their name and say that they're a terrible actor. Anyway, so this was done, and our goal was to remunicipalize the water system, and this contract was by which the water had been privatized was taken to the court and proved to be null, illegitimate. This was done badly. It doesn't, this is like it never happened, right? Which was like our chance to remunicipalize, because buying it back would be financially impossible, because we sold it for nothing, and then obviously the actual value to buy it back at its actual value would be completely impossible. So we had this opportunity, and the way we wanted to do it, because we have this hugely powerful company that has, to give you an idea, it's set up a newspaper, online newspaper, with the sole purpose of attacking our government, because they knew that we wanted to remunicipalize. And so because we knew we were against this really powerful corporate adversary, we thought, well, the best way to do this, to get the maximum kind of political strength behind this, is to do a city vote, because we knew that the polls showed that people wanted to remunicipalize, and it was a very popular measure. So we firstly created, because in Barcelona you couldn't do city referendums, that was the first thing. So first we had to create the law that would allow this to be happening. And Agbar Suez, whatever it's called, has taken to court every single element of the referendum law and the referendum law contracts. So like the tender for who would print the ballot papers, they took it to court, knowing like, and in fact, they actually have struck down the participation law, because they didn't want there to be a participation law so that people couldn't vote to do the remunicipalization. And eventually they appealed the ruling against the initial contract, and the Supreme Court unfortunately ruled in their favor, which says a lot about the judicial system in Spain. But my point is that the fact that, what they call lawfare in the English-speaking world, the idea of using the law and challenging either participatory laws or the results of democratic decisions by local institutions in the courts, is a huge challenge, because that means that it doesn't matter if you have 90% of the population decide something, if it's taken to court, and you have a conservative legal system, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So that has happened to us on a lot of occasions. It's also happened with housing laws in Spain. And also, to be fair, it's one of the reasons why the independence movement in Catalonia has grown, because a lot of democratically decided decisions about Catalonia have also been struck down in the courts. And at least here in Spain, and I think in the US as well, the use of the legal system to overthrow democratic decisions is an absolutely huge challenge.
Yes. We have a few. That's a major challenge, and one you speak a lot about feminizing politics. It's a very important topic of the book. It's like it's a thread throughout the whole book. Could you say a little bit about how you have been working with this and the challenges involved in with feminizing the politics of Barcelona?
Well, again, I feel a bit nervous talking about this to a Swedish audience, because I'll probably be doing feminism splaining, because you're usually pretty good on this kind of stuff. But yeah, first, for us, there's a few elements. One is something that you guys and girls do, I think, pretty well, which is gender parity, and making sure not only that there's equal representation of men and women in different decision-making and debate spaces, but also trying to make sure that the way that there's equal presence, but there's also equal participation. So, for example, we have a tool that we use a lot, which is time limits, so that nobody can speak for longer than 2 minutes, because otherwise what tends to happen is that the men go on and on and on. And that helps a lot. And also the types of formats of the debates, we find that if we do kind of the traditional assembly where you have to stand up in 200 people and make in front of 200 people and make a speech, then we'll get a line of older men queuing up to make a speech in front of 200 people. Whereas if we have different formats of smaller groups, or then women tend to participate more. So that's one thing, is making sure the participation is equal or close to. Well, that also has to do with things like providing childcare and other more practical stuff too. Then there's the issue of what we consider politics, which we've already talked a bit about, which is what are the issues that concern us and what are the policies we want to put forward, and what are the political issues that we are prioritizing. And here, I guess there's a lot of policies that, again, in Sweden are probably more advanced than here in Spain, to do with childcare, or to do with feminist urban planning, or to do with I don't know, like feminizing the police force, or well, feminist economic policy, feminist city policy in general. And here, something that's been important for us is not only do we have a department of feminism and LGBT, we also have a department of gender mainstreaming, so that the feminist perspective, any policy from any department has to pass through the gender mainstreaming department, particularly the budget, obviously, to assess the gender impact, but also the cultural policy, all of the different policies. So that's another thing. And then I guess the part that is more innovative maybe, or more distinctive to us, is again going back to the way that politics is done. And here, I guess, and again here it's important to not be misinterpreted, but the analysis is that politics, electoral politics and left politics in general, has in a lot of ways been done according to certain values that or certain methods that prioritize or value very highly certain practices or attributes that are traditionally codified as male. So to give some examples, the strong leader, or the kind of intellectual, strategic kind of genius of politics, or the idea of being, very fast and very kind of taking decisions, and the idea of kind of party discipline and hierarchy and having kind of a leader where everyone else follows, and the idea of people being right or being wrong, and the idea of winning and losing, the idea that you would have a debate and somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, or an election. I don't know, a set of kind of practices that some things might make sense. I mean, actually, strong leader, we have a strong leader, happens to be a woman. But when we talk about feminizing politics, I guess what we're talking about is critically looking at those kind of things and saying, well, what if instead of having one leader, we had a collective model, like they do in Kurdistan, in the Kurdish movement. They always have at least two kind of chairs or presidents or mayors, not just for the gender parity, but also because why should one person have to take all of the pressure of the load of making a decision? What if we look towards models that are more based on building empathy and building consensus, instead of just making a decision that 50% plus one agree with? What if we value different types of knowledge, not just a kind of academic knowledge, but also personal experience? And what if we also bring into our politics as an important element the emotional and kind of personal dimension, so we don't just treat each other as kind of political beings, but also we try and be aware of each other as people when we do politics, and we try and look after one another. For example, in Barcelona in Común, one of the things that we set up, we had a group that was like a emotional care support group that had done some work a few years ago, but got reactivated during COVID, and it helped it gave support to our activists who were worried or stressed during the pandemic. It's also done in certain groups in the organization where there's been some sort of conflict. It's done mediation, bringing these kind of things in and kind of humanizing, I guess, a bit politics, and just valuing a bit more the kind of characteristics and practices that have been undervalued because they've been associated with the feminine and with women. And that doesn't mean throwing away all of the things that have been associated with masculinity and men, because some of them are really important and good. I think leadership, as much as we want a horizontal, participatory, collective movement, there is a role for leadership. And it would be an error to say, well, because this is, a kind of patriarchal model, it has no use. It's about trying to balance and trying to bring the best in from all different types of abilities and values, and trying to just question the way that things have always been done.
I think I want to pick up a question that little bit relates to this. We have a question about if you have any plans to involve children and young people in the participating in political decisions, and perhaps maybe you can say something about who is participating. Who are the people when you invite people for participation in a neighborhood, for example? Who is it that generally participates? Are they young, old? What could you say anything about this? And do you have plans, or do you have already been involving young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two questions are related, because I think we all know that if you just kind of put up a sign and say, come participate, or invite everyone to come participate, then there'll be some serious inequalities, and you'll tend to find people who are older and not people who are younger. You'll tend to find men rather than women. You'll tend to find white people, middle-class people. And so, although we do have participation mechanisms that are open to everybody, something that's really important is going out to look for people and going to the specific groups or representatives or examples. Maybe a sample is the better word. Sample groups of groups that they would never come to you to participate. And I think young people are probably one of those groups, especially because the young people who would come and participate are not necessarily going to be the ones who are representative of the rest. I mentioned before sex workers. I mentioned undocumented residents of the city. Also people with mental disabilities, for example, and in a lot of the big citywide participation processes, there's one that is called the Municipal Action Plan, and it's basically the government program for 4 years, and that has a participation process. And in that process, a very important part of it is going out to find, people who wouldn't participate otherwise. So in the specific case of young people, I know there's like a youth council, or there's some sort of official institutional mechanism that is from before we came to govern. So there's that, and I'm not sure specifically of any examples of new things that we've done in that area. Okay, so maybe we can get back to that topic another time. Yes, we have 10 minutes to go, and we have a few topics that could be expanded a lot, but we will have to try to keep it a little bit short. There is one question related to the examples of fearless cities or municipalist cities that we have been talking about. Many of them have been big cities, and in Europe or in the US, except for Argentina, and you mentioned Brazil. Are these the typical municipalist platforms, or how about municipalist platforms in the more rural towns and in other continents, perhaps? Could you say something about this? Yes, no, the rural small town municipalism issue is very important, and I should have brought it up before. because it's when we were talking about the differences actually between different platforms. And it's something that, although the name Fearless Cities, everyone loves it, the one problem it has is that it says cities, but we're very aware that municipalism is not just also in small towns and rural areas, but actually some of the best examples are in small towns and rural areas, because that's actually where it's, I don't want to say easiest, but it kind of works best because you're actually working at a very small scale. Whereas, I don't know, municipalism in a huge city of millions of people, I'm not sure whether it, it's even, you can call it municipalism in the same way. So there are many examples. There's examples in Spain previous to 2015. Like I said, there's one of the candidacies, well, the government in France, Ceylan, is a very important model. In the UK, there's one called Independence for Froome, which is, and they've got a whole network of very small towns where people have organized to stand for office. The thing about the smaller and the rural ones is that often it's harder to find out about them. It's harder to discover them because they're in towns that you haven't even heard of. And we kind of tend to hear about them through, our contacts in other places, but they're really important. And also the municipalism of the global South is also really important. Latin America in general is full of good examples. And we are working on expanding our research and contacts into Africa as well, because we have a couple of platforms that we know about in Cape Town and in I want to say Beirut, but it's true that we don't have as much information about what's going on there as we would like. So it is important to recognize both of those things, that it's very much not just a big city Western Europe phenomenon by any means.
Okay, maybe this question is very suiting to have here in the end of it. What are the plans in the future for the Fearless Cities networks? What are coming up next? You mentioned, and maybe you didn't explain, but there was Svante did talk about it a bit, that the background to for this book was this conference in Barcelona 2017, where also there was maybe 15 or something like that Swedish participating. So what is coming up next with the Fearless Cities network globally?
Well, I'm so glad you asked me this question, because we are actually currently organizing a second global Fearless Cities event, which due to COVID will unfortunately be online. But we're also hoping that actually makes it more accessible to more people in more places who don't have to physically come to Barcelona. And so I can't give you many more details. I can tell you it will be in July. And I can tell you that we'll be announcing more information about how to sign up, and very soon on our Twitter and other social networks. Let me put the in the chat. I'll put our Twitter handle of we've got an account in English, which might be more useful for you guys. So sometime in May we'll be announcing more information about that, and also to say that the program, we want to do the program in a participatory way too. So if you guys have an idea for a session or a debate or a presentation that you would like to make at the Fearless Cities in July, then we would be very happy to include it in the program.
Well, I tell you, Kate, we will process that one in the course that is now taking place. We are a little bit more than 30 people. involving me, who are studying the new book, and all those experiences, these exciting things that are going on. So it was very good news. A last question. I think if you're listening to this and you get this idea that, well, it could be interesting to work on such a platform, a municipalist or a fearless cities platform in the city where you live, what would you have just 4 minutes, but what would your best advice be? The short version of, I mean, the book is just, maybe you should read the book. Or what are your advice?
No, in a single phrase, talk to your neighbors. I mean, that is what it's about. And that could start with a conversation, you know, in the local market or with someone in your apartment building. But in the end, it's about people talking to one another in small groups, in bigger groups, and through those conversations, starting to realize, hey, that thing that I've been thinking about this city or this town, like, for example, in Barcelona, that actually everyone says tourism is really good, but maybe there's too many tourists. And then you talk to someone, they say, yeah, I've been thinking that too, but no one else is saying that. You start talking to one another and you suddenly realize that there's a lot of people who think the same way as you. And then one day you say, well, let's meet up and talk about what we could do about it. And in the end, that's what it's about. If I had to say a step 2, it would be set yourself a really achievable, tangible goal and try and change something concrete. In the case of Barcelona, it was, you know, when Ada Colau first stood in front of a door and stopped an eviction. Because when you prove that you can change something, even however small, that's what makes people look at you and say, okay, this person has some credibility. They said they were going to do X and they've done X and I've seen it happen. And next time you go to stop an eviction, I'm going to come with you. And I'm going to tell someone else to come with me because I know I've seen it works. And that is how it's through conversations and it's through showing that you can actually get shit done. They're 2 things that are basically the motor behind the municipalist movement. So it sounds easy, but that's it, but it's not.
So that was the short version of the Fearless Cities recipe. I think that was a very good note to end on, and I'm very happy that we had a chance to have you here today, Kate.
My pleasure.
Yes, Svante, do you want to add something when we are wrapping up?
Yeah, I wrote it in the chat now, but that the Swedish book is coming out soon, and we're putting up a website where you can pre-order it. That you see in the chat. Jag kan säga på svenska förstås att det går att förbeställa boken från oräddastäder.se snart. Inte riktigt än, men snart kommer det att vara möjligt.
Inom en vecka. Inom en vecka. Fantastiskt. If someone got interested in this book, so you can order it within a week. But well, we thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who was participating in this in the chat and listening. And I think we can anyone who wants to put on the camera can do that. I'm putting down the live stream.
It would be great to see you. It's difficult to talk to people you can't see.